Well, thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Eun Kim, as introduced. Today, I want to talk about ICH E6 guideline. Well, when I was requested for this presentation, I thought that this would be very familiar guideline to the audience, so I thought about what I can share further at this podium. So today, I'd like to talk about the overview of the ICH guideline and also ICH GCP. And today, I will be focusing on the R2 of E6. However, R3 is under revision with a step 2. So I may not be talking about step 2. And I will focus more on the changes from the R1 to R2. By having that understanding, you will be able to understand more for the changes from R2 to R3. So the R3, the draft, you can see at the ICH website. It's only at step 2. So it will take 1 or 2 years for the ICH E6 R3 to move to step 4 and 5. And the quality management is really highlighted in the R2. So ICH E8, the general consideration part, will be also considered in the R3. So overall structure of the E6 will be changed. Well, that's the current proposal, so we're not sure how it will be changed for the final version. But anyway, there will be some changes from R2 when we have the R3 as the final document. For the ICH guideline, you see that there is an efficacy guideline, which is relating to the clinical studies in human subject. And of the efficacy guideline, my focus today is E6, which is the good clinical practice. But I will focus on R2, as I said. But E8, the general considerations for the clinical trials, will be incorporated into the R3 of E6. Then of the efficacy guideline of ICH, E1 and E2 are also important guidelines. Of course, E2, E5, E8, and E9, and E10. Other efficacy guidelines need to be read together with the E6 in order to understand the GCP. So I think I need to study further to understand other guidelines under the efficacy umbrella. So not just focusing on the individual chapter, but the efficacy guideline is more about the general considerations for the human subject clinical trials. It's not about like E6, E20, and E19 recently were introduced, and E21 is under development. Do you know what E21 is about? Usually, audience will not answer you. So E21 has only the title that it's about pregnancy and feeding. So the clinical trials on the pregnant and breastfeeding women. So far in the clinical trial protocol, actually one of the exclusion area is the pregnant woman and lactating woman, and also pediatric population. But we do have the guideline on the pediatric population, but for the pregnant and the breastfeeding women are one of the populations that are mostly excluded from the clinical trials. But E21 will be dealing with the considerations to be made to involve and include pregnant and or lactating women in clinical trials. That's one of the global trends going on. So as you can see, efficacy guidelines are evolving. And actually, it has been like 6 or 7 years for E6 to be revised. And actually, the previous revision was made in 20 years. And after 2016, many different things have been updated, and many different part of the guideline has been updated. So 5 years or 10 years from now, there will be a lot of changes to the efficacy guidelines, and there will be the new chapters added to the efficacy guidelines. So ICH GCP, I just briefly go through the general history of the efficacy guideline here. E6R1, you see the step 1 and step 2. And at step 4, the guideline is the final version. And step 5 is the implementation and adoption by the ICH member countries. So by step 4, we can have the final version for implementation. So as you can see here, the step 4 was in 1996 for the E6. And 1 month later, it became R1. So for the past 20 years, RCG6 R1 version, which was made in 1996, applied. And June 1996, after that, in 20 years, R2 was generated. In 2016, you may know that KGCP has revised, and RCGCP was also revised. So the Korean MFDS became the member of the ICH, and therefore that's why the Korean GCP guideline has been changed. However, actually the KGCP had a lot revision to the investigator-related one, whereas the ICH guideline revision was more about sponsors. So there was not the very much aligned revision, but after that there has been many different revision and also alignment. And the ICH GCP related content will be included and incorporated into the KGCP. And therefore, although it's not easy for us at this moment, we need to understand both the ICH GCP and Korean GCP. So today we will be focusing on R2 of the G6. The glossary, the principle and investigators, and chapter 5 is sponsor. These blue lines are the addition in 2016. So it was an addition, an addendum. There was no change to the concept itself. So the blue lines, or the blue colored sections, were added in 2016 as an addendum. So here the sponsor, which is 5.0, has a new chapter to R2. So that was the biggest change in E6 when it comes to R2. So here you can see the chapter number and what the chapter is about. So 1.63 and 1.64 and 65 were added in R2, and these are under glossary section. And IRB and IEC. In R2, there were no addition in R2. Investigator, there were some sections added in R2. There were many in Chapter 5. No addition for Chapter 6 and 7. Some for Chapter 8. So if you look at that addendum, in the introduction, this line is very important line. The evolutions in technology and risk management processes offer new opportunity to increase efficiency and focus on the relevant activities. And when the R1 text was prepared, that was more about the paper-based process. But with the technology development, we do have more opportunity now. So RCH GCP E6R2 allow and introduce electronic system. So that's the change. So electronic data and electronic system were accepted with the R2. So the quality management can be done based on the risk. So we collect or the capture risk and evaluate risk. And the tools for that risk assessment became available. For example, central monitoring, risk-based monitoring, all these things can utilize electronic systems. And by adopting or allowing electronic system, these risk-based monitoring or the management became available. And when it comes to principles or the ethics or the scientific principles, no changes in R2. But electronic system became available and the addendum was including them. So now we have the R2, E3 reporting, E8 general consideration, E9 population, the statistical principle, E11 population, all relevant guidelines need to be read together. So that was well stated in the introduction. R1 and R2 may sometimes have conflict because this is an addendum. If that is the case, R2 takes the precedence or this priority. So in the introduction, as I just explained, with the evolution in technology, we can manage clinical trials more effectively by having like electronic data, electronic system, and others. That's all about the introduction. And here in grocery, we have 3 new added terms: certified copy, monitoring plan, validation of computerized systems. Under the ICH GCP, the glossary or the words in the glossary are listed in accordance with the alphabetical term. But here, these new words were added at the end of the list of the terms in the glossary. So as I said, as a principle, the terms in the glossary are listed in the alphabetical order, but here these 3 terms are the new addition, so they are at the end of that list, just added to the list. And many companies, and I think me myself, always try to think about how we can well control and manage certified copy. Or it says that a copy of the original record. But when it comes to the content and the structure, everything needs to be equal or the same with the original record. But the thing here is to confirm and validate that sameness or the sameness. Then who can validate that and how? In the past, with the paper-based process, the original record and the copy actually were easy to be distinguished. And if it was not difficult, then you can notice that the original copy is always written in blue color pen, whereas the copy can be printed in black. But now we are utilizing Excels or other electronic tools, and we also have the printout from the electronic systems. Let's say we print out 5 documents, and which one is the original and which one is the certified copy when we have 5 copies from one document? Can I just decide it? See, this is where we need to think about what the original record is. Who controls the original record? If you know much about the essential document, then you would know how important the original record is being well controlled. So originality of a record and the management and control of the original document is really important. So as we introduce electronic system, the certified copy and the original record need to be well managed. And that's why we have the certified copy as a term and concept. And I believe many companies take the very first printout of the document is the original record, and then the second and third and the fourth copies, the following copies will be signed by the people from QA or the QC to mark it as a certified copy. So we need to think about whether this process would suffice or, I am also thinking about it. And monitoring plan. It's quite surprising to see this term to be defined now. Actually, so far, there was no definition of the monitoring plan in ICH guideline because the guideline was made like 20 years ago. So everything that we do for the monitoring plan is this one, the monitoring plan in this glossary. So strategy, method, responsibility, and requirement for the monitoring the trial are all described in this monitoring plan document. And when we have the inspection, sometimes MFDS does not require monitoring plan. That was the past. But now, we have to submit the monitoring plan when we have the GCP inspection. And for the validation of computerized system, well, I'm not a very techy person, so I do not know to what extent the validation needs to be done for the computerized system. However, EDC system, actually CROs and sponsors have a validated document, and the developing companies of the EDC provide such document. But it's not just about EDC, ETMF, eSource, EMR. These computerized systems need to be validated, and there should be some document to show that validation. And another addition is made in the principle of ICH-GCP. There were 2 lines in the addendum. And as you can see here, all information related to the clinical trial need to be documented and controlled and stored. Then, in what media, regardless of the type of media, so far, we recognize that this control and storage requirement are for the paper-based information. However, regardless of the type of the media, all information, all clinical trial information should be recorded, handled, and stored. And the systems, when we use those systems, the very first thing that we need to consider is the protection for human subject. Well, electronic system and the electronic data, we use them a lot, but sometimes we see some examples where the private information of the patients can be transferred together. So sometimes I have like patient address at the sponsor side, because the informed consent form or the informed consent data is synchronized. So this would be a good example where we may break the law. So the human subject protection should put on the front end when it comes to the use of the electronic data and system. Third part is IRB and IC. No changes in R2. The responsibilities and the composition and what kind of the procedures should be taken at the IRBIC and the record, the retention period of record, nothing has changed. As for the ethics, it may not be directly incorporated into the system itself. So the IRB is basically about the ethical aspect of the clinical trial. So here, as the ICH guideline is evolving toward the effectiveness or the efficiency of the technical utilization, maybe this ethical part may not be the right place where the revision is made. And next one is the investigator. In Korea in 2016, as I said, the Korean GCP had some revisions to the investigator, like utilization of the SMO was allowed, and that brought about a lot of changes. But in the ICH GCP, there was no addition of such. But here you can see the investigator is responsible for the activities and the duties conducted for the trial, although that functions or the duties are conducted by the third party hired or entrusted by the investigator. And of course, the third party outside of the clinics or the hospitals can be hired or employed to serve for the duties and the functions. For example, a researcher can be hired for a specific clinical trial, or some organizations may be hired for the clinical trial related activities, but ultimate responsibility lies with the investigator. So, along with the changes or the revisions in the guideline, you can see that for the clinical trials, we do have the regulatory body, IRB, IEC, and sponsor. So far, we had a support from the CRO for the sponsors. These are the participants in the clinical trials. But you can see some imbalance in this structure. See, only the sponsors has the support from the CRO. Site or institute investigators need to have some support like SMO. So that's the change in Korean GCP. Although it is not fully and actively utilized, even the regulatory body recognize the presence of the SMO and the CRO in the clinical trials. Because, in the past, the CRO is a supportive function, so the CRO is not a party to the contract. However, recently, the CRO became the third-party contractor to the agreement. The same is true for the SMO, for investigators. So at the hospital, but we call it usually a site or institute, and we do not call doctor. We just call them as investigator because we are doing the clinical trials. The doctors and nurses are doing the healthcare activity at hospital, but clinical trials are conducted at the same hospital, which is the site or institute. However, the investigator apply the investigational product to the patient. And this activity is a research activity based on the Pharmaceutical Affairs Act in Korea. So as if the sponsors have ICRO, the investigators, when they do the research activities, they may have SMO as support. That's kind of a trend. So SMO was first created in Korea back in 2016. However, in other countries like the US or in European countries, SMO were first established in early 2000. So it's really important to understand such a changes. And as for the investigator, as I said, there are not many changes to the responsibility of the investigators themselves. The support, the medical support, and the safety reporting and others, not much of a change. However, the investigator should maintain adequate and accurate source document and the trial record. And here, source data should be managed well because there can be many changes made, and therefore the original record need to be well kept and managed via an audit trail. When we had a paper-based system, let's say we were not allowed to use any erasures on the record. We always just cross out the original entry and then keep the record of who made such a change and when. But if you think about Excel, Word, and PowerPoint files, if you make any changes to the content and then click on the Save button, then the previous value or the text will just disappear. Excel, Word, and PowerPoint, they are the electronic tools, not the system. They are the tools to record something, but they're not the electronic systems, and therefore input and output cannot be controlled and traced in those MS Office suite. So is it okay for us to create and prepare document utilizing those electronic tools? Well, the Excel document or the record cannot be accepted as an original document. But you can just print it out from the Excel file and then you just sign on it. Then it becomes like kind of a paper-based the original document. Or you can do some version management. So if you have any changes to the file, then make it another version and lock it out. So anyway, we need to be able to manage the document, control the document so that we can have the audit trail. The audit trail is really important, particularly for EMR. And you know, the auditors are very good at finding out and looking at the audit trails. They are very good at finding out who made the changes and when. Actually, I was involved in one audit recently, and I confirmed that there was a change to the audit trail, in the audit trail by investigator and assigned well. But you know what? On that day of the change, the investigator was not at the site. Of the medical record, for that patient, I found that, well, a professor somebody who is the investigator is absent today. So the other professor leaves the record substituting Professor A. So that's the reason why we were able to identify such an issue in the audit trail. So that happens because all the records and the systems are all interlinked. Let's say if you think about the informed consent, the electronic informed consent, I tried it during the COVID-19 trial. So investigators loved it in the beginning. However, at the end of the day, they didn't like it because how many minutes were taken by the patient to read out from one page to the end page of the informed consent. If it takes like only a few seconds for the 5 pages of the informed consent, we just cannot say that the information on the informed consent were well explained it. And the investigator signed on something at the like 11:30 in the middle of the night. So everything can be tracked like this one. So whether the system is really effective is something that we need to think about. And the most of the updates were for the sponsor. All the chapters so far that I explained were like numbered in a way like 4.1, 4.2. But here you can see it starts with 5.0, which means this chapter as a whole become an addendum. So it's something new. Do you remember what the title for the 5.1 quality management and assurance? Actually, that's very first one that the sponsors need to do. Quality assurance and quality control. But even before that, there is a 5.0. So when it comes to the quality assurance, it is about assuring the good quality. But even before that, we need to control and manage quality. So 5.0, the quality management, is the start of the chapter 5 on sponsor. So by utilizing a quality management system, the quality need to be managed over the whole life cycle. So when the audit need to be conducted, is it like in the end of the clinical trial or at the start of the trial like that? That kind of the question is no use now because the quality need to be controlled and managed from end to end. And to manage quality, starting from 5.0.1 till 5.0.7, you can see the specifics of the quality management. Then what would be the process of the quality management recommended by the ICH? Here you can see that as the first step, the critical process and data need to be identified. In the clinical trial, the risk factors or the most important data and what would be the most important step. These things need to be identified first. Of course, everything is important, but still, we need to identify the critical ones when we develop the clinical trial protocol. So the quality management actually need to be applied from the very beginning. So the process and data which are critical that need to be identified. For example, efficacy data. The primary endpoint efficacy, of course, that would be important and critical. And let's say if the hospitals are important, then which department, the site, as a part of the clinical trial process, become the critical factors in the process. Then the risk identification need to come. What would be the risk factors that impact on such critical process and data? And usually so far we focus on the clinical trial level, whether the design is appropriate and if there is any missing data, or the informed consent obtaining process is appropriate or not. So these were the risk factors that we identified. However, the system level like SOP or the validation of the computer system like the EMR and also the personnel's. For example, this site has a lot of potential subject, but the investigator does not know much about the clinical trial itself. So these kind of all different things at the system level, and also the things that we have considered for the risk identification at the clinical trial level, these two levels need to be considered to identify risk. Then the risk need to be evaluated. The likelihood of occurring and the extent to which such errors would be detectable, and the impact of such error, whether it impact on the human subject, protection, to what extent, that kind of things need to be considered in evaluating risk. So we have the critical process and the data identified, and we also identify the risk factors, and we also evaluate those risk factors. Then, if the risk factors exist in the clinical trial, then we need to be able to control them. It is not always to just reduce risk. It is called as a risk control. There can be some risks that we just accept it when we consider the extent of impact. Time, post, and quality are the three major elements for the clinical trials. So if we reduce risk and if we correct risk, all the risk, then it will prolong the clinical trial time window. If that is the case, this is not a good control. Sometimes, compared to the time and cost, a certain level of the risk can be accepted. And some risks need to be corrected, and other risks may be accepted. So those evaluations need to be done and controlled in such a way. And after the risk control comes, the risk need to be communicated to the relevant people. What were the risks and how were they controlled? All these questions and the answers to those questions need to be well communicated. And of course, the risk need to be reviewed periodically. Although we identify and evaluate risk at the beginning, and also although we accepted some of the risk and corrected others, but still we need to review whether those activities were appropriate or not. And when we have the global study, after completion, all the deviations and others were reviewed. Well, I do it, and but it is called as a listen and learn session. So it's kind of a wrap-up activity to a clinical trial project. So that would be a good way to do the risk review at the end of the day to draw some lessons. And after all, the risk management approach need to be described and reported in the CSR. DCA Chapter E3, Section 9.6, Data Quality Assurance. So the quality management process should be reported in the CSR. So that's important for the risk management. But still, the quality is always important and difficult. The quality is something that we cannot see. So when it comes to the project quality management, as you can see, the deliverables from the project need to be satisfying the requirement of the users. So it's not like this one is like 50 scores and that one is 100 scores and that one is just 0 score, fail. We just cannot say it. And we need to spend a lot of time and cost to improve the project deliverables, but that requires a decision. So in the QMS, as we have the E6R2, many companies are focused on the establishing the QMS. But as I said, R2 was introduced in 2016. But every year I keep asking, is there any body who can actually share the best practice of the QMS at the sponsor's side? But I cannot find quite a good number of people who can talk about it. That means, of course, the sponsors, the pharma companies, established QMS for their own, but they are not sure whether their QMS as a system is something that can claim to be very appropriate and very good one. So anyway, for the process, we need to have a plan for the quality management and actually the quality management activity and control. So that's all about the QMS. Then what is the QMS? This is the quality management system. Actually, we have been doing it. Monitoring, inspection readiness, mock inspection, audit, everything is related to the quality and they are a part of the QMS. So the QM or QA related activities are part of the QMS. But we have not reviewed the result and we have not documented those activities fully. So these are required under the QMS, meaning that the full documentation and the periodic reviews and others. So under the quality assurance system, we are moving toward the quality management system so that under the QMS as a system, we do the QC and QA related activities that we have been doing so far, but still we have like documentation and other improvement. So how to make QMS? First, we need to have the policy for the quality. And we need to have the quality unit, which is independent. And this independent quality unit should be able to manage the quality, and therefore there should be quality manual or SOP. So the document generated, QMSOP or SOP, the system manuals, all different documents need to be created. And after the audit, the auditors try to be independent. So the QA department conducts audit, the self-audit, and that's it. So the result of the audit, the self-audit, need to be well communicated. And the recommendation for the correction, that kind of thing need to be shared and communicated. That's the risk review and risk communication. And also the assessment and follow-up on the compliance, mock inspection, the regular one. All these activities fall into the QMS. So as for the quality management, starting from the protocol step, data collection, until the trial report generation, the quality need to be maintained and assured. So in order to do so, the training need to be conducted, and also the procedures need to go together. So if there is anything happen during the procedure implementation, then that need to be feedback into the training so that the improvement can be made. So that's the basic concept of the QMS. So I just added a little bit more on this part. So moving again back to the R2, 5.1 is quality assurance and quality control, 5.2 CRO. The CRO can be commissioned with some function and duty related to the trial, but still the sponsor has the oversight responsibility. And for the trial management and data handling record keeping, the risk analysis for the system need to be conducted. And if there is a risk, then that should be managed more. And SOP is required. The system should cover not just the use of the system, but also the system setup, installation, and also use. So the SOP should cover everything about the system. And once the system is established, then there will be upgrade or the migration. So the validation need to be conducted when there is a software upgrade or the migration of data. And other than that, the sponsor's responsibility have no addition. And monitoring. Actually, the change has been made because of the monitoring. What we do the monitoring, in the past we just go to the site, but here electronic system and data can be accepted. So we can go to the site or we can utilize the data in the electronic system, implementing centralized monitoring. So there are two different monitoring methods, on-site and centralized monitoring. And centralized monitoring itself can be enabled because the electronic data is accepted. So the risk can be identified right away, and if there is a risk identified, then the on-site monitoring can be done. So on-site monitoring may not be like the regular monitoring activity, meaning that if there is a risk identified, the on-site visit can be paid. So the strategy need to be formulated to combine and integrate on-site monitoring and centralized monitoring in the right balance. For the centralized monitoring, we visit the site and look at the source, but that's not it, or that's not the end of the story. We need to look at the logical flow. For example, there is a DM or diabetes. Then, however, there is a little bit of a difference in terms of the used drugs. So even though we need to check the source data, we can see some difficulties or some failure in the logic. So that kind of the logical review is needed. And after the monitoring visit, the monitoring report need to be produced. No changes to the monitoring report, not just for the on-site monitoring, but also for the centralized monitoring. The report of the monitoring need to be made. So MVR need to be made for that, although the format can be a bit different, but still the on-site, not just on-site, but also centralized monitoring also need to produce the report. For the monitoring plan, the sponsor should develop a monitoring plan that includes everything about the trial. It is a mandatory, it will be a mandatory document. And the next one is the non-compliance. If there is non-compliance, the prompt action need to be taken. We know it, but here with the addendum, there should be a root cause analysis conducted. Let's say we do have a missing blood tested data. The correction is to withdraw blood promptly. But we also need to understand the root cause. There can be many different causes for that. For example, the doctor did not prescribe for the blood withdrawal. Second, the patient just denied it. And third, there was a mistake or error during the blood withdrawing process. So depending on the analysis of the root analysis, the correction activity would be like training or the revising or updating the procedure and others. So the root cause analysis is added. 6, the protocol, no changes. 7, IV, no changes. 8, the electronic the source data can become the electronic data, so the control and the management of the electronic data as an essential document need to be well managed and controlled. Well, I was in quite a rush because I need to cover many different things in a limited time. And as I said, R2 will evolve into R3. So there will be structural changes. I think it becomes more reasonable. So next year or the year after that, I believe that you will see another revision to E6. Thank you so much.